Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our conversation here on projection. I'm Emily Bennington with the Circle of Atonement, and I am with Robert Perry, as always, founder of the Circle and editor of the Complete and Annotated Edition of A Course in Miracles. This is the only one I could find. I'm sorry it's so beat up, but this is the Complete and Annotated Edition, affectionately known as the Purple Book. Robert and I are hosting an online workshop called Maybe It's You, Understanding Our Relationship with Projection this Sunday, January 31st from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern. And our discussion today is a bit of a preview of that workshop. It's a 2-section workshop with a 30-minute break in between each session. And in it, we are going to explore what the Course has to teach us on the topic of projection. Projection is a word that we are all familiar with. We know that projection is when you take an unwanted trait or emotion in yourself and put that on to someone else. But as you'd expect, the Course has its own take on this concept that's much deeper than how we tend to associate it. And so that's what we're going to explore today and what we're going to explore in greater detail in our workshop on Sunday. If you would like to join us for that, we hope you will. You can find all the details at circleofa.org/events, and we hope to see you there. So, Robert, as I mentioned, there's already a general understanding of projection in our culture. We all know, as I was saying, that projection is where you take something that you don't want to see in yourself and project it onto others so that it doesn't appear to be in them. It doesn't appear to be you, it appears to be in them. So, how does the Course's view of projection differ from our popular view?
Well, it differs, but it starts at the same place. It's working on that same basic view. And here's a quote from this is in chapter 1 in the CE. Projection still has this hurling connotation because it involves hurling something you do not want, excuse me, and regard as dangerous and frightening to someone else.
So that sounds essentially like what we've always thought about projection, right?
Yeah, it does. And on that basic level, it is. What's different about the Course's view really lies in what we are hurling onto others. Our popular understanding of projection is really it's about projecting specific things like specific traits or emotions onto others.
Yeah. So when we were talking about this morning, we came up with a list of examples of projections. So examples would be a woman who is stealing objects from the supermarket, fears that her wallet's going to be stolen, a man who constantly talks throughout dinner, but when he's interrupted, he blames the other person for wanting attention and being a bad listener. A man or a woman who is threatened by their own anger accuses someone else of having hostile thoughts about them. A mother who pressures her child to be successful when she hasn't achieved her own goals in life, and someone who is being extremely critical and pointing out at the same time where others are being critical. So these are the kinds of things that we think about when we hear the word projection. So how does the Course's version of projection differ?
Its focus is on projecting much deeper and more central things. Like perhaps the biggest focus is projecting our decision to separate from God, to reject God or throw God away. Related to that is it talks about our belief that we authored ourselves. Um, Also related, we project our split mind, our basic conflict in us between light and darkness, love and hate, God and the ego, those kinds of things.
So these are a far cry from the things that I was mentioning earlier in our list, like being critical or our own anger and whatnot. So the Course's examples are way deeper and feel far more ancient to us, right?
It's true. It's true. And those things I mentioned, they're kind of interrelated in that you could say if you put them all together, what we're projecting is some kind of deep-seated core darkness in us, something in us that's rejecting God, rejecting the light, and that essential core thing is what's being projected.
Yeah, that's like the ancient hate that we talked about in a podcast recently. It's something that's very old in us. We've carried it into this incarnation. And so what is the effect of projecting this core darkness in us?
Well, the effect is very significant because it's far less targeted. In those examples, we're projecting our critical nature onto a certain person or our bad conversational habits onto a certain person. Here, we end up projecting, it's kind of like the projection is a broadcasting. We're just projecting it onto everyone. So that darkness in us, we're seeing in everyone, everywhere. No one is completely spared.
So the idea is that rather than seeing one person as being evil, we see the whole world as being evil. And I know we don't like to use that word, but that seems to be the effect, right?
Right. Yeah. And it's not so much, I mean, I think it does involve those traits we see in people, but more basic, it's just this essential sense that there is something in people that is destructive, self-serving, untrustworthy, that's going to hurt us. And I think the word evil is pretty apt. I mean, we use the word evil to talk about extreme people, but the things we're calling evil are things that in milder forms we see in everybody. So it's just we see this darkness everywhere.
Yeah, and that definitely explains a lot about how we see other people, how we see the world, and how we see ourselves. I mean, we just take for granted that we're always the innocent one, we're always the good guy, we're always the hero of the story, and that tends to be our general view of the world, right?
Right. And that's another effect of projection. We not only see that inner darkness in us out there, but since it's out there, it's not in here. So we see bad world, but innocent self
Good
and
us.
good us. Right. We're
Mhm.
always the good guy, like you were saying. And it's a very suspicious story.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, you'd wonder why we don't actually question that more because we can't always be the innocent one every single time.
Right. It's amazing that we are always the good guy and we never think, gee, this is weird. Like what a coincidence.
Yeah, I'm right again.
Again,
I'm
right.
innocent again. Mhm.
Yeah. So it projection is what's responsible for that bizarre, self-serving illusion. But there's something else that we should question as well. There are three places early in the course where projection is set against the golden rule. Okay. So three times the course talks about how those two things are different.
So that's an odd combination talking about projection, which is an insight that came from Freud, and the golden rule, which is from the teachings of Jesus and obviously found in many world religions. So how did we get from Jesus to Freud to the course?
Well, it is not a combination. But once you see how the course sets those two things, basically shows how different they are, it makes perfect sense because think about it this way: the golden rule is all about giving to others what we want ourselves. Projection, however, is all about giving to others what we don't want ourselves. They are direct opposites. In fact, the course openly calls projection, quote, the opposite of the golden rule.
Yeah, I don't think that's ever been said before the course, right?
Not, I've never, I mean, who would even put something from Freud and something from the, I've never heard it said.
Yeah, but it's true. Like once you point it out, it's completely obvious. Projection is the opposite of the golden rule because you're giving someone else something that you don't want.
Right, right. And that should be, I mean, I think we should get that more than we do. As an example, for instance, or an analogy, imagine that your backyard is full of rotting trash. And to get rid of it, you just take it and distribute it to all your neighbors' yards, right? If you did that, we would all see that as criminal.
Yeah, we would because we recognize that taking your trash and putting it all over your neighbor's yard would be an attack, right? We see that as an attack. And yet we don't really appreciate the attack of projection. It's a attack, it's an emotional attack, it's a mental attack, it's an attack on the psyche, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We can't really see the thing
Like you see the
visibly.
trash in the
You see the
yard,
trash. Yeah.
right? But you can't see projection as an attack. And yet it is attacking.
It is. And that's something that the Course points out again and again. I've been going through all the references to projection, and it's striking how much he says he associates projection with attack. So, for instance, here is a passage from chapter 6 in the text. It says, anger always involves projection of separation, which ultimately must which must ultimately be accepted as entirely one's own responsibility. So the idea here is that whenever we're angry, it's because we have projected onto others responsibility for us being separate, for our separated condition, rather than accepting responsibility for it ourselves.
So whenever we're angry, so that's just really interesting because the course thinks that we're angry all the time. And there's that famous line from lesson 21 that says a slight twinge of annoyance is nothing but a veil drawn over intense fury. So that's pretty intense. I mean, we're angry all the time.
Yeah, and piggybacking on that, there's a passage in the Manual for Teachers where he says that the peace of God is unlike anything you've ever experienced before. That's how you know it's the peace of God. It's totally new. And then he says, how do you experience the peace of God? By having a moment without anger. So if you put those two things together, what he's implying is we rarely have any moments without anger. And that's basically implicit in two places in the text where he points out that anger, well, so if we don't have moments without anger and all projection comes from anger, then we're projecting all the time. And he does basically say that all projection, all anger comes from projection. I want to read this passage here. Projection and attack are inevitably related because projection is always a means of justifying attack. Anger, which is what we use to justify attack, without projection is impossible.
So what's going on here is that projection causes us to see an entire evil world, to see in a way that is the opposite of the golden rule, so that we're constantly doing unto others the opposite of what we want them to do unto us. And that projection is responsible for all of our anger down to the slightest twinge of annoyance. So then, can we go so far as to say that projection is responsible for all of the unkindness in the world? So if it's responsible for all the anger, then is it responsible for all of our unkindness if our unkindness is coming from our anger?
Well, I mean, he's saying that it's responsible for all anger, and then our anger is the way we justify all attack. So there's a clear statement there that's responsible for all the attack. which we could say is the same thing as all the unkindness. Yeah.
And
Yeah, which is huge. I
it's
mean, we
huge.
don't
And
think that way.
it's huge. And one thing that you and I have gone round and round on is I could never get for a while that attack came before fear. I always thought that we were afraid and then we attacked and then we felt guilty and whatnot. But in this, it's the anger, like it always comes first. And that explains so much of our world, our behaviors, our projections. And so it's just for me, it's illuminating to think this is what comes first. We are angry and then we project.
No, we're angry, then we attack.
Sorry, we're angry, then we attack.
But the anger rests on the projection.
We're angry and we attack, and the attack rests on the projection.
No.
Say it again.
So we project, and that's the basis for our anger. So this is how he's describing it in these passages. We project, that's the basis for anger, and our anger is the basis for our attack. Because the idea is
and we're always angry.
Right. So which means we're always projecting. But the idea is that when you project, you're saying you're responsible for something that, something is causing me pain. You're responsible for my misfortune, my suffering. Well, that very statement implies I should be angry. It implies anger.
Mm-hmm.
So projection is underneath, is undergirding the anger, which in turn is supporting the attack.
And if 8 billion people on the planet are doing this, then that goes a long way towards explaining why there's so much conflict and so much friction in our world. So we need a solution desperately. And so how does the course say that we can get out of this?
Yeah, that's the big question here. I just want to pause and take in the enormity of what you just said. I mean, we don't look out at the world and say, well, this is what projection does. But that's what the course is saying.
Yeah, again, as we were saying before, the thing that we should question is why the other person is always the bad guy and we're always the innocent one. We don't stop and pause on that. We don't stop and pause on the fact that if 8 billion people are in attack, then that's why it gives rise to the world that we see. So there's so much to think about here.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what is the solution? To get there, we have to first note that the course is saying that the basic dynamic behind projection, in which we take something we see in ourselves and then we see it in others and in the world, that's something we can't get out of. That dynamic, according to the course, is simply how the mind works. And that's the equipment that we came in with. We can't change that equipment. Okay. But the good news is that according to the course, we can simply take that basic dynamic and use it in a new way. Projection is only one way to use it. There is another way, and that other way has different results.
Right. So this projection is always paired with extension.
Right.
So tell us more about extension.
Well, extension is rooted in, you could say, being kind to ourselves. Specifically, the course says that we need to bring all that we are into the light. And this means identifying with our underlying God-given innocence and wholeness. The word the course most often uses in this connection is holiness. We need to identify with our underlying holiness.
Okay. So before we were talking about the darkness in us and the darkness being associated with our decision to separate from God, how does that square with identifying with the innocence and the light and the holiness in us?
Well, somewhat paradoxically, the Course totally affirms both. It does say that in this world, there's a lot of darkness in our minds. And yet, however much that may kind of dominate most of human behavior on the surface, it's not our reality. Underneath that darkness is the innocence and the wholeness and the holiness that are our true nature and that are eternal.
So it seems like if we did this, if we identified with that innocence and wholeness and holiness, then the whole motivation to project would be gone. So if we are looking within and we're seeing light and wholeness, then why would we need to hurl that away, right? On from us onto others.
Right, right. If we really saw that in us, and the Course actually talks about this, there's a great passage in chapter 3 where it says, the innocent mind has everything and strives only to protect its wholeness. This is why it cannot project. It can only honor others because honor is the natural greeting of the truly loved to others who are like them. So what I find interesting there is if you really are in touch with your innocent mind and its wholeness, you just can't project because it's not in you to dishonor other minds like projection does.
Mm. That's really beautiful. And that's a good setup for the extension piece because you're extending at that point.
Right. So once you identify with that innocence and wholeness and holiness in yourself, the Course says you have to then look out from that to see that in others. And the best quote for this is possibly this one from chapter 1. The way to perceive for golden rule behavior, I like that, for golden rule behavior, is to look out from the perception of your own holiness and perceive the holiness of others. So what he's actually saying in that section is yes, the golden rule is the way you should act, but to actually act that selflessly, to treat people with the respect and importance and worthiness that we want to be treated with, we have to perceive differently. Well, how can we perceive to act that way? And that is, we look out from the perception of our own holiness and perceive the holiness of others.
Hmm. So we extend to others the holiness that we see inside of ourselves, which is the complete opposite of what we were saying earlier, where we were projecting onto others the sinfulness that we see in ourselves. So we're extending our holiness and instead of projecting our sinfulness, quote unquote sinfulness.
Yeah, yeah, our perceived sinfulness. Well, yeah, I mean, what's interesting, it is the same basic dynamic, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
something we're seeing in ourselves. We're then seeing that out there in others, but it's the opposite thing that we're seeing in ourselves and others in each case. And what he stresses in the Course is that just as the dynamic or the basic thing we're seeing is opposite, so the results are opposite. And here is what's said about the results. This is a passage that starts with the extension dynamic, and then talks about results. So the Holy Spirit begins by perceiving you as perfect. There's that first part. Knowing this perfection is shared, he recognizes it in others. There's the extension part. And now for the results, thus strengthening it in both. Instead of anger, this arouses love for both because it establishes inclusion. Perceiving equality, he perceives equal needs. So, in terms of the results, basically seeing in this way first strengthens the awareness of perfection in both people. This arouses love, not anger, for both. The two people feel a sense of inclusion. They feel like they're together, not excluded from each other. And they perceive equality, which
Mm.
is really great.
Yeah, and here we are back at equality again, which has become so important as a course teaching to us here at the Circle. And one of the reasons why is that it's hard to one of the reasons why it's relevant to this conversation is that it's hard to dump on someone and see them as your equal at the same time, right?
Right. And that's something that we'll talk about much more during the workshop. But what the Course says is that the ego justifies projection, saying, you should do this because then you'll feel superior. If you take
Mm-hmm.
all of your darkness and see it in somebody else, leaving you just filled with light in your eyes, then of course you'll feel better than them. And it's a
It's
lot of
special.
the, you'll feel special. And that's a lot of the motivation for doing projection.
Hmm.
That's a wrinkle we haven't really said today, but we'll talk about that more in the workshop. Okay, so this to me brings us back to your comment about 8 billion people, because imagine there's this great quote where the Course says something like, there has yet been no comprehensive reawakening or rebirth in the world. And then it says this can't happen as long as humanity continues to project.
Hmm.
So if we stopped projecting,
Yeah, what an incredible idea. Because if projection is the cause of our anger and our attack in the world, then the reversal of that would mean a reawakening, a rebirth, a regreening of the world. And my goodness, that's desperately needed, isn't it?
it absolutely is. And who, I mean, before diving into this so much, it would have sounded odd to my ears to hear, oh, well, if we could just get a handle on this projection thing, the whole world would be a different place.
Mm-hmm.
But that's exactly what the Course is saying.
Yeah, it's well, as we've been saying, it's just a fascinating thing to think about. If we're all doing this, 8 billion people on the planet are projecting their negativity onto someone else, then of course we have the world that we have. And what could it look like if we learned how to unwind this within ourselves and extend holiness instead?
Yeah,
It would be a whole new world.
it would be. I mean, if you think about 8 billion good guys in an evil world, 8 billion superior ones in an ethically inferior world, of course it's going to be a complete mess.
Yeah. So before we go, I want to get this basic idea down. So projection is when we put on to someone else that which we don't want from within ourselves.
Right.
Extension is when we look from the holiness within us to the holiness of others. And am I right there?
Right. So we look within, we look deeper than the darkness. We see the holiness God placed in us forever. And we want that. That's a good thing. And then we take something we want and see it in others. And now we're seeing the same thing in us and in them.
Yeah, and I really liked how you phrased that, deeper than the darkness. So we all know that there's this layer of ego, and we
In everyone else.
so so we have to go beneath that layer of ego in ourselves to our holiness and goodness, and see below the layer of ego into others to their goodness and holiness and equality and worth, and so we're extending from our holiness to theirs. um I love that so much. And I want to make sure that I didn't confuse anyone with that little sequence that we went through earlier. So can you just explain again clearly without me muddying it up? It's attack, fear, projection. So can you explain that quickly before we go?
Okay. So I think the fullest version of the chain in terms of this discussion would be we made an ancient decision to turn away from the light, to turn away from God. um, to believe that we had authored ourselves, no God needed. And that is this deep-seated, you could say, well of darkness in us that we believe is us. And obviously, we would be deeply uncomfortable with that. So we project that onto others. And in that projection, of course, we will be angry with them because now they're the bad guy. They're the cause of our misfortune, of our separated state. Okay. So the projection then leads to anger. And when you're angry with somebody, you attack them. And then once you attack them, according to the Course, you feel you deserve attack yourself. And so you're expecting it. And now you're afraid. So fear then comes at the end of the chain. It's not like, oh, we're just afraid. And we're afraid because we got so mistreated when we were younger. And
Well,
now,
yeah, and that's where you and I would go round and round a while ago. I mean, I keep talking about this because I think I made the same assumption that others do, that it all starts with our fear, and it doesn't. And so I just think I always take every opportunity I can to point out that distinction, because I think the more we're honest with ourselves that it starts with our attack, then the more we're able to unwind it at its true root cause.
Yeah. And the more part of what I'm taking away is that the more we can realize that that attack is the result of a psychological trick called projection, in which we see something in ourselves as if it were outside of ourselves. The more we can realize, oh, my perception of things is based on this self-deception, and the anger and the attack can more easily pass away because it has no basis.
Oh my God, this workshop is going to be so good, because as you're sitting there rooting all of this in self-deception, I want to go into more of that, because that's it. Oh my God, it's so true. We're doing this because we feel justified and self-righteous in it, when really it's a deception at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
all right. Well,
Yeah, there's so much to talk about with this
there's
topic.
so much here, and the conversation that we've just had only scratches the surface of what we are going to cover on Sunday. We are obviously going to go way deeper into what the Course has to say about projection, and specifically how it impacts our relationships. We are going to discuss how we can spot our own projections, how we can withdraw and reverse them so that we can become those clear channels for the expression of love in the world. But we're also going to talk about what we can do when others project their negativity onto us. Robert and I didn't have time to get into this today, but this is a whole other component of it as well. We've talked today about what happens when we project our negativity onto others, but there's, again, what do we do when others who are obviously projecting it onto us?
Well, we'll be giving tools to successfully accuse your partner of projection.
Stop. That happens without our tools,
Yeah,
Robert.
right. We do it anyway.
Well, we hope that you will all join us for that. And again, you can find the details for our projection workshop to be held this Sunday, January 31st, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern. You can find the details for that at circleofa.org/events. Thank you so much for being here with us today. This is yet another in a long line of remarkable Course teachings. And if you would like to be notified about further conversations just like this, we hope that you'll sign up for our mailing list at circleofa.org/subscribe. Robert, thank you as always.
It's been fun.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation. Look forward to going deeper very soon. So thanks to everyone for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye for now.